it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I'm a vampire hunter for the Vatican. Here are my stories. By Brandreth McClure. Episode 2. Shadow of the Damned. Part 1. A heavy, sorrowful silence hung over the Vatican, a place where even the hallowed hallways seemed to mourn the loss of Father Gabriel Valente. The grand corridors, which were usually bustling with the quiet reverence of those who served within its sacred walls, now felt empty, hollowed out by the absence of the man who had been the Vatican's most formidable protector. The darkened skies above mirrored the mood within, casting shadows over the ancient architecture, as if the very heavens wept for the fallen sentinel. In a small, dank chamber deep within the Vatican, Father Thomas de Luca knelt in prayer. His hands were clasped tightly, the knuckles were white with tension, but his mind was far from at peace. The room, once belonging to Gabriel, still carried the faint scent of incense, a lingering reminder of the man who had taught Thomas everything he knew about fighting the forces of darkness. But now that knowledge felt like a burden too great for him to bear. Thomas's thoughts were a maelstrom of self-doubt and inadequacy. Gabriel had been a legend, a warrior of unparalleled faith and strength. Now that he was gone, Thomas was expected to fill the void. The weight of that expectation bore down on him, making his chest tighten with anxiety. How could he possibly live up to Gabriel's legacy? How could he protect the church from the same evil that had claimed his mentor's life? These questions ran through his mind as he rose from his prayers, the cool stone floor pressing against his knees like the weight of the world. He moved through his daily routines with a mechanical precision, hearing confessions, preparing for Mass, assisting in the rituals of exorcism. Each task was performed with the same meticulous care he'd always applied, but now there was an edge of desperation to his actions, a need to prove, to himself more than anyone else, that he was capable of the role thrust upon him. But deep down, Thomas knew that these routines, these rituals, were not enough. They were the trappings of a life that had once seemed straightforward, but now felt like a mask he wore to hide his fear. Beneath the surface, the darkness that Gabriel had fought so valiantly against still lingered. It was growing stronger. Thomas could feel it, like a creeping shadow at the edge of his consciousness, waiting for the moment when he would falter. In the private chambers of the Pope, Thomas's inner struggle did not go unnoticed. Pope Benedict XVII, an elderly man with eyes that had seen too much, observed the young priest closely. He'd seen the uncertainty in Thomas's eyes, the way his hands trembled ever so slightly when he thought no one was watching. The Pope knew that Thomas was untested, unproven, and yet there was something in the young man, a potential that had yet to be fully realized. The church was in desperate need of a new sentinel, and despite his vulnerabilities, Thomas might be their last hope. The Pope's thoughts lingered on Thomas as the young priest was making his way to his chambers, unaware of the path that lay ahead. The Vatican was a fortress of faith, but it was also a place where secrets were buried deep, and darkness had a way of seeping through the cracks. Thomas would soon be called upon to face that darkness, and when the time came, the Pope could only pray that Gabriel's teachings would be enough to guide him. As Thomas walked through the echoing halls, the weight of his mentor's legacy borne down on him like a leaden shroud. He was no longer just an apprentice, a follower in Gabriel's shadow. He was now expected to be the new sentinel, the guardian of the Vatican, the slayer of the damned. But with every step he took, he could not shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in, that the darkness Gabriel had fought to contain was not yet vanquished, that his own faith would soon be tested in ways he could never have imagined. The afternoon sun cast long golden beams through the stained-glass windows of the Vatican, illuminating the intricate mosaics that adorned its hallowed halls. Despite the warmth and light outside, an undercurrent of unease permeated the sacred enclave. Whispers of unrest and shadows of doubt lingered among the clergy, hinting at troubles that lay beneath the surface of daily rituals and prayers. Father Thomas de Luca, walked briskly through the intricate maze of corridors, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floors. He had received an unexpected and urgent summons from the Pope himself, an audience in the sanctum sanctorum, the most secretive chamber within the Vatican, reserved only for matters of utmost importance. The very thought sent a shiver down his spine. This was a place steeped in mystery and profound significance, one that Thomas had never before been granted access to. As he approached the massive oak doors guarded by the stoic Swiss guards, Thomas took a deep breath, attempting to steady the fluttering in his chest. The guards exchanged a brief glance before one nodded and pushed open the heavy door, revealing a solemn chamber lined with ancient tapestries and shelves laden with dusty tomes and sacred artifacts. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of aged parchment and burning candles. At the center of the room stood Pope Benedict XVII, his regal presence commanding yet gentle. Clad in his ceremonial white robes, the Pope's weathered face bore lines of fatigue and concern, his eyes reflecting a depth of wisdom and burden. Beside him stood Cardinal Marconi, the head of the Order of Sanctus Sanguis, his expression equally grave. "Welcome, Father Thomas," the Pope intoned softly, his voice resonating through the quiet chamber. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Thomas bowed deeply, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your Holiness, it is my honor to serve." The Pope gestured toward a simple wooden chair opposite his own. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." As Thomas took his seat, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of trepidation. The gravity in the room was palpable. The silence was heavy as the Pope regarded him with a solemn gaze. "Thomas," the Pope began, folding his hands atop an intricately carved table, "the Church finds itself in a time of great peril. Darkness stirs once more, threatening the very foundations of our faith and the safety of the innocent." Thomas's brow furrowed as he leaned forward, attentive and alert. "What has happened, Your Holiness?" Cardinal Marconi stepped closer, holding a thick weathered journal bound in cracked leather. The edges were frayed, and a faded cross was embossed on the cover, a symbol Thomas recognized immediately as belonging to his late mentor, Father Gabriel Valente. In the weeks following Gabriel's passing, we have monitored for any lingering threats connected to his final mission, Marconi explained, his voice low and measured. "Unfortunately, our worst fears are coming to fruition." The Pope nodded gravely. "Reports have reached us from Buenos Aires. A series of brutal, unexplained deaths. The victims were found drained of blood, their bodies mutilated in ways that suggest a sinister, supernatural force at work." A chill ran Thomas's spine as he absorbed the information. "You believe this is connected to Lucius?" he asked, his voice barely concealing the dread that clawed at his insides. The Pope exchanged a solemn glance with Marconi before responding. "We fear that Lucius's spirit was not wholly vanquished during Gabriel's sacrifice. Evidence suggests that he has found a new host." Marconi placed the journal gently on the table before Thomas. "This belonged to Gabriel. It contains detailed accounts leading up to his final battle with Lucius, as well as warnings about the vampire's resilience and cunning." Thomas hesitated before reaching out to touch the journal, his fingers tracing the worn edges reverently. As he opened it, pages filled with Gabriel's meticulous handwriting unfolded before him, accounts of horrors faced, battles fought, and the relentless pursuit of an evil that refused to die. One passage caught his eye, inked in bold strokes. "Should Lucius's spirit endure beyond my efforts, he will seek a new vessel, one susceptible to his whispers and promises of power. Vigilance must be maintained, for his corruption spreads like a plague, unseen until it is too late." Thomas looked up, his eyes wide with realization. "Do we know who has been possessed?" The Pope's expression darkened. "We believe it is Michael. He was a promising young initiate within the order, devoted and pious. But he has been unaccounted for since Gabriel's passing, and evidence places him in Buenos Aires at the time these atrocities began. Thomas's heart sank. He'd known Michael, had trained alongside him, shared meals and conversations about faith and duty. The thought that his fellow brother could be the vessel for such evil was almost too much to bear. "Are we, certain?" Thomas asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Perhaps there is another explanation." Marconi's gaze softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "We have considered all possibilities, but the signs are undeniable. Michael has fallen under Lucius's influence, and his actions are escalating. If we do not act swiftly, countless lives will be lost, and Lucius's power will grow beyond our capacity to contain." Silence settled over the chamber as Thomas grappled with the gravity of the situation. Doubt and fear warred within him, doubt in his ability to confront such a formidable foe, and fear of failing those who depended on him. He closed Gabriel's journal, its weight in his hand symbolic of the burden he was being asked to carry. The Pope leaned forward, his eyes piercing yet compassionate. "Father Thomas, you have trained under Gabriel's guidance. You possess the knowledge and the faith necessary to face this darkness. We are entrusting you with this mission. Travel to Buenos Aires, find Michael, and put an end to Lucius's reign of terror before it spreads further." Thomas's throat tightened, words momentarily failing him. He felt the enormity of the task pressing down on him, his earlier doubts resurfacing with renewed vigor. "Your Holiness," he began hesitantly, "I am honored by your faith in me, but I fear I may not be the one suited for such a mission. Gabriel was a seasoned warrior, and even he fell in battle against Lucius. I am but an apprentice, inexperienced and untested." The Pope's gaze softened, and he reached across the table to place a reassuring hand on Thomas's shoulder. "True strength does not come from experience alone, but from the purity of one's faith and the courage to act in the face of darkness. Gabriel saw potential in you, as do I. You are not alone in this fight. The Lord's grace will guide and protect you." From within the folds of his robes, the Pope withdrew a gleaming artifact, a crucifix of exquisite craftsmanship, adorned with intricate engravings and a brilliant sapphire at its center. Thomas recognized it instantly. The sacred relic that had belonged to Gabriel, known as the Crux Sancti Benedicti. It was said to possess powerful protective properties against evil, a symbol of divine light against encroaching darkness. The Pope held out the relic to Thomas, his expression resolute. "Take this. Let it be a symbol of the responsibility now entrusted to you, and a reminder of Gabriel's enduring spirit. With this, and with your unwavering faith, you can prevail." Hands trembling, Thomas accepted the relic, feeling a surge of warmth emanate from it as it settled into his grasp. The weight was comforting, its presence instilling a flicker of confidence amidst a sea of uncertainty. Marconi stepped forward, his voice firm yet encouraging. "You leave at first light. Arrangements have been made for your passage and support upon arrival. Time is of the essence, Father Thomas. The longer we wait, the stronger Lucius becomes." Thomas nodded slowly, his resolve beginning to solidify. Thomas nodded slowly and rose from his seat, carefully tucking Gabriel's journal and the sacred relic into his robes. "I will do all that I can to stop this evil, for Gabriel, for Michael, and for all those who stand to suffer." The Pope offered a gentle, reassuring smile. "Go with God's blessing, my son. May his light guide you through the shadows." As Thomas exited the sanctum sanctorum, the weight of his mission settled upon him, heavy yet purposeful. The corridors of the Vatican seemed darker, the shadows deeper, but within him a small flame of determination burned brighter than before. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger and temptation, but he also knew that he carried with him the legacy of his mentor and the hopes of those who believed in him. The battle against darkness was about to begin anew, and this time Father Thomas de Luca would be at the forefront, ready to confront the demons that threatened to consume the world he had sworn to protect. Part 2. Father Thomas de Luca arrived in Buenos Aires under a veil of thick, grey clouds that hung oppressively low over the city. The rain fell in never-ending sheets, drenching the cobblestone streets and casting a gloom over the already shadowed alleys. The city, with its towering cathedrals and crumbling colonial buildings, felt like a place out of time, its beauty marred by an undercurrent of dread that seemed to seep from the very stones. As he walked through the rain-soaked streets, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The people he passed on the streets moved quickly, their faces turned down, as if the rain carried more than just water, perhaps a sense of something dark, something malevolent, lurking just out of sight. Every shadow seemed to shift unnaturally. Every gust of wind carried whispers that sent chills down his spine. His first stop was the local diocese, a grand yet aging structure nestled in the heart of the city. The walls of the diocese were thick with the smell of incense and old wood, a stark contrast to the fresh, clean air of the Vatican. Here, Thomas hoped to gather information and support from the local clergy. However, he was met with an icy reception. The priests he spoke to were tight-lipped and evasive, their eyes filled with fear as they muttered about the recent deaths but offered little else. It was clear they knew something, but were too terrified to acknowledge it. The local law enforcement was equally unhelpful. The officers were either unaware of the supernatural nature of the murders or simply too afraid to confront it. They dismissed the deaths as the work of a deranged serial killer, unwilling to consider the possibility of a darker, more sinister force at play. Thomas quickly realized that he was on his own, forced to navigate the labyrinthine streets and delve into the city's underbelly without any official support. The bodies of the victims had been found in various parts of the city, each one drained of blood, their throats bearing the unmistakable puncture marks of a vampire. The brutality of the killings, coupled with the sheer number of them, pointed to a predator who was not only powerful but growing bolder with each passing day. Thomas knew he had to act quickly, but the city itself seemed to conspire against him, its mazes of streets and shadowy alleys obscuring his path at every turn. As his investigation deepened, Thomas ventured into the darker corners of Buenos Aires, places where the light of day barely reached, and where the influence of Lucius had taken root like a spreading cancer. In these hidden enclaves, he discovered that Michael had not only embraced the power bestowed upon him by Lucius, but had also begun to gather followers. Some were lured by the promise of immortality, seduced by the allure of eternal life and power. Others were coerced into servitude, their wills bent by Michael's growing influence and the fear of death. The underbelly of the city, with its crumbling tenements and decaying warehouses, was a breeding ground for this new evil. Thomas found himself descending into these dark places, his faith tested with each step. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if the very city was rotting from within. In a dilapidated church, long abandoned and now serving as a hideout for Michael, Thomas found Gabriel's hidden journal. The discovery was both a blessing and a curse. The journal, stained with blood and filled with cryptic notes, revealed the full extent of Michael's transformation. It detailed the young initiate's descent into darkness, the gradual erosion of his humanity as Lucius's spirit took hold. The journal also contained Gabriel's final warnings, scrawled in a desperate hand. Lucius's power grows with each passing day. The true threat lies not in his strength but in his ability to spread the darkness, to corrupt others as he has been corrupted. Reading these words, Thomas felt his resolve begin to waver. The journal spoke of horrors that Gabriel, a seasoned warrior of the faith, had barely survived. How could he, a mere apprentice, hope to succeed where his mentor had fallen? Doubt gnawed away at him, its tendrils wrapping around his heart and mind. The deeper Thomas delved into the investigation, the more the darkness began to take its toll on him. His nights became plagued with nightmares, visions of Gabriel's final moments, of Michael's twisted grin as he drained the life from his victims, of the Vatican engulfed in flames. All these dreams were vivid, almost real, leaving Thomas shaken and disoriented upon waking. But it wasn't just his sleep that was haunted. During the day, he began to experience unsettling hallucinations. At times, he would catch glimpses of shadows moving on their own, or hear the distant echo of sinister laughter. Faces in the crowd seemed to morph into twisted demonic visages before snapping back to normal. He would find himself lost in thought, only to realize that minutes, sometimes hours, had passed without him noticing. The worst of these visions came one night as he stood before a cracked mirror in his modest lodgings. As he stared at his reflection, he saw his own face begin to change, his eyes darkening, his teeth elongating into sharp fangs. For a brief, horrifying moment, he saw himself as a vampire, a twisted reflection of what he feared he might become. He recoiled, stumbling backward, his heart pounding in his chest. These visions preyed on Thomas's deepest insecurities, feeding on his fear that he was not strong enough to resist the darkness. He began to question his own sanity, wondering if Lucius's spirit was not only corrupting Michael, but also seeking to break him, to turn him into the very thing he'd sworn to destroy. The line between reality and illusion blurred. Thomas found himself slipping into despair. The more he confronted the darkness, the more he felt it consuming him, pulling him into an abyss from which there might be no return. His faith, so unshakable, now felt fragile and brittle, like a candle flickering in a storm. As the bodies continued to pile up and the city of Buenos Aires fell further into fear and chaos, Thomas knew that time was running out. He had to confront Michael, but the question that now plagued him was whether he had the strength to do so, or whether he would fall, as Gabriel had before him, into the waiting arms of the darkness. The rain had finally stopped, leaving Buenos Aires cloaked in an eerie stillness. Father Thomas de Luca moved swiftly through the narrow streets, his breath fogging in the cold night air as he made his way toward a grand, ancient cathedral that loomed over the city like a silent sentinel. Beneath it lay the catacombs, an intricate web of tunnels and chambers that had served as a place of worship and burial for centuries. It was here in the bowels of this sacred place that Thomas had uncovered the horrifying truth behind the recent string of deaths. Michael had not been acting out of mere bloodlust. The murders were part of a carefully orchestrated ritual designed to grant Lucius full manifestation within Michael's body. Each victim had been chosen for a specific purpose, their blood used to empower the ancient vampire spirit that had taken root within Michael. The ritual, Thomas learned from Gabriel's bloodstained journal and from the cryptic symbols etched into the walls of the catacombs, was set to reach its climax during a major religious event, a citywide celebration that would draw thousands of devout Catholics into the streets and into the very cathedral under which they now stood. Thomas's heart pounded as the full weight of the situation settled on him. If Michael succeeded, Lucius would not only return with all his former power, but would also have the strength of countless innocent souls fueling his resurrection. The prospect of such evil being unleashed upon the world was almost too much to bear. The ritual would culminate in just a few days, during the grand procession in honor of the city's patron saint. The streets would be filled with the faithful, making them easy prey for the unspeakable horror that Michael intended to unleash. The realization struck Thomas like a blow to the chest. Michael was no longer the young initiate he'd once known. He had become something far more dangerous, far more monstrous. Lucius's corruption ran deep, and there was no guarantee that even if he managed to defeat Michael, the vampire's influence could be fully purged. Stopping this ritual was no longer just a matter of saving Michael. It was about preventing the apocalypse that Lucius had been planning for centuries. But as Thomas prepared himself for the inevitable confrontation, a darker thought was eating away at the edges of his mind. What if Michael's corruption was irreversible? What if the only way to stop Lucius was to destroy Michael completely, sacrificing any chance of saving the young man he'd once known? The possibility chilled him to the bone, but he knew there was no time to dwell on it. He had to act, and fast. Descending into the catacombs beneath the cathedral, Thomas was greeted by a suffocating darkness that seemed to close in around him. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the walls were lined with the bones of those who had been buried here long ago. He moved cautiously, the sacred relic, Gabriel's cross, clutched tightly in his hand, its cold metal a small comfort against the overwhelming sense of dread that permeated the ancient tunnels. The further he ventured into the catacombs, the more oppressive the atmosphere weighed on him. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the distant drip of water and the soft echo of his footsteps. The path twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the labyrinth until he reached a massive chamber illuminated by the dim flicker of candlelight. In the center of the room, standing before an altar adorned with arcane symbols and the remains of the ritual's previous victims, was Michael. The young initiate looked nothing like the man Thomas had once known. His eyes, once bright with the light of faith, now burned with an unnatural crimson glow. His face was twisted in a cruel smirk, and his posture radiated confidence and power. The sight of him, fully under Lucius's control, sent a wave of sorrow and anger crashing over Thomas. "Michael," Thomas called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You don't have to do this. It's not too late to turn back." Michael turned slowly. His expression was one of cold amusement. "Turn back? Oh, Thomas, you truly are naive. Lucius has shown me the truth. He has given me power beyond your comprehension. Why would I ever want to return to the weak, pathetic existence I once knew?" Thomas took a step forward, his grip tightening on the relic. "This power is a curse, Michael. It's destroying you from the inside. Lucius doesn't care about you. He's just using you as a vessel, nothing more. You can still fight this. We can still save you." Michael's laughter echoed throughout the chamber, a chilling sound that made Thomas's blood run cold. "Save me? There's nothing to save, Thomas. Lucius and I are one. Together we will reshape this world, purge it of its weakness and usher in a new age of darkness." Realizing that words would not reach him, Thomas raised the relic, its silver surface glinting in the candlelight. "If you've truly given yourself to the darkness, then I have no choice. I will stop you, Michael, even if it means destroying you." Michael's smirk faded, replaced by a look of contempt. "You stop me? You couldn't even save Gabriel. What makes you think you can defeat me?" With a roar of fury, Michael lunged at Thomas, moving with a speed and ferocity that took him by surprise. The two clashed in a violent struggle, the force of their blows sending echoes throughout the catacombs. Thomas swung the relic with all his might, but Michael's strength was overwhelming, each strike pushing Thomas closer to the brink of defeat. The battle was brutal and desperate. Thomas fought with everything he had, drawing on his training, his faith, and the memory of Gabriel to fuel his resolve. But Michael, empowered by Lucius, seemed nearly unstoppable. His attacks were relentless, each one landing with bone-crushing force. Thomas could feel his strength waning, the weight of the relic growing heavier in his hand with each passing moment. Just as Michael was about to deliver the killing blow, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer. Thomas summoned the last of his strength and drove the relic into Michael's side. The sacred object burned with a holy light as it made contact, and Michael let out a scream of pain and rage. The force of the blow caused Michael to stagger back, his expression shifting from confidence to shock as he realized he'd been wounded. Panting heavily, Thomas watched as Michael retreated into the shadows, his form dissolving into the darkness of the catacombs. The chamber fell silent once more, the echoes of their battle fading into nothingness. Thomas sank to his knees, exhausted and battered, but alive. He'd survived the encounter, but the victory was hollow. Michael was still out there, and the ritual was still in motion. As he knelt in the cold, damp chamber, the full gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Lucius's influence had grown too strong, and Michael had become something far more dangerous than Thomas had ever anticipated. The ritual would continue, and the only question that remained was whether Thomas could find the strength to stop it, or if he would fall, like so many before him, to the darkness that threatened to consume everything. Part 3. The streets of Buenos Aires were alive with the sights and sounds of the grand religious festival. Thousands of faithful are gathered, their voices lifted in prayer and song, their hearts filled with devotion as they celebrated the city's patron saint. But beneath the surface of this joyous occasion, a dark undercurrent pulsed, one that only Father Thomas de Luca could sense. He moved through the crowd with grim determination, his eyes fixed on the towering cathedral at the heart of the city, where he knew Michael would be waiting. The night had fallen, casting long shadows over the festival, and the cathedral loomed ominously against the darkened sky. Thomas had spent the last few days preparing for this final confrontation, gathering every weapon and sacred object he could find. The relic of Gabriel's cross hung heavily around his neck, its weight a constant reminder of the responsibility he bore. In his hands he clutched a consecrated blade, its silver edge gleaming with a holy light. He had performed every ritual, whispered every prayer, and fortified his resolve for the battle to come. And yet, despite all his preparations, a deep unease gnawed at him. He pushed through the throngs of people, making his way toward the entrance of the cathedral. The heavy wooden doors creaked open as he stepped inside, the vibrant sounds of the festival fading into an eerie silence. The interior was bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, but the atmosphere was oppressive, as if the very air had been tainted by the darkness that now resided within these sacred walls. At the far end of the nave, standing before the grand altar, was Michael. He was clad in a long, dark robe, his figure barely visible in the dim light. His eyes, now fully consumed by Lucius's influence, glowed with a malevolent red hue. The sight of him sent a chill down Thomas's spine, but he steeled himself, knowing that this was the moment he'd been preparing for. "Michael," Thomas called out, his voice echoing through the vast space. "This ends tonight." Michael turned slowly, a twisted smile playing on his lips. "Does it, Thomas? Or is this just the beginning?" Thomas advanced, holding the consecrated blade out before him. "You don't have to do this. Whatever power Lucius has given you, it's not worth the cost. I know there's still a part of you that remembers who you were, who you really are." Michael's laughter echoed off the cathedral's walls, cold and mocking. "You still don't understand, do you? Lucius has shown me the truth. The church, the order, even you. Oh, Thomas, you're all just pawns in a game far older than any of us. Lucius is the future, and I will help him usher in a new age, one where the strong rule and the weak are purged." With a sudden movement, Michael raised his arms, and the shadows around him seemed to come alive, swirling and twisting in unnatural patterns. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and the candles flickered wildly as if caught in a fierce wind. Thomas tightened his grip on the blade, feeling the holy energy within it pulse in response to that evil that now filled the cathedral. "Well, you leave me no choice," Thomas said, his voice filled with both sorrow and resolve. He charged forward, the blade slicing through the darkness as he aimed for Michael's heart. The battle erupted with terrifying ferocity. Michael moved with unnatural speed and strength, his every strike imbued with the dark power of Lucius. But Thomas fought back with equal fervor, drawing on the strength of his faith and the memory of Gabriel to guide his hand. The clash of blade against dark energy echoed through the cathedral, each strike sending shockwaves through the air. As the battle raged, it became clear that this was more than just a physical confrontation. It was a spiritual struggle, a test of wills between two forces, one rooted in light, the other in darkness. Michael taunted Thomas with visions of his failures, his doubts and his fears, trying to break his spirit. Thomas fought back with every prayer, every ounce of faith he could muster, refusing to let the darkness take hold. The two combatants were evenly matched, their powers clashing in a deadly dance of light and shadow. But as the fight wore on, it became clear that Michael was drawing strength from the very cathedral itself, feeding off the corruption he'd spread through the sacred ground. Thomas could feel himself weakening, his strength ebbing away as the darkness closed in around him. Just as it seemed that Michael was about to overpower him, a sudden surge of divine energy coursed through Thomas's body. He fell to his knees, grasping the relic around his neck, and began to pray with all his heart. The words of his prayer echoed throughout the cathedral, and the consecrated blade in his hand began to glow with an intense, blinding light. "Lord, grant me strength to vanquish this evil," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling with both fear and hope. "Let this light shine through me, so I may deliver your justice." As he spoke, the light from the blade intensified, filling the entire cathedral with a brilliant radiance that cut through the shadows like a beacon of hope. Michael staggered back, his eyes wide with shock as the holy energy washed over him, disrupting the ritual and severing his connection to Lucius. "No!" Michael screamed, his voice filled with rage and fear. "You cannot stop this. I am Lucius. I am eternal." Thomas pressed on, channeling the full power of the relic into a final, desperate attack. He thrust the blade forward, piercing Michael's chest with a surge of holy energy that exploded outward in a blinding flash. The cathedral shook with the force of the blast, the very ground trembling beneath their feet as the power of Lucius was violently expelled from Michael's body. For a moment, everything was still. The light faded and the darkness that had once filled the cathedral began to dissipate. Michael crumpled to the floor, his body smoking and lifeless. The ritual had been interrupted, and Lucius's spirit had been severely weakened, unable to fully manifest in the physical world. The city had been saved, but at a terrible cost. Thomas stood over Michael's body, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his mind reeling from the intensity of the battle. He'd won, but the victory felt hollow. Michael had been lost to the darkness, consumed by the very evil he'd sought to control. And now, Thomas was left to pick up the pieces, to carry the weight of yet another life lost to the curse of Lucius. As the sounds of the festival began to seep back into the cathedral, Thomas sank to his knees, the consecrated blade falling from his grasp. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his sacrifice settle over him like a shroud. The city was safe, but the battle had left him physically and emotionally shattered. And in the silence that followed, he sensed that this was only the beginning. Lucius's influence had been weakened, but it was far from gone. The vampire's spirit still lingered, waiting for another chance to strike. And Thomas, though victorious, was left to wonder whether he'd truly won or if the darkness had merely found another way to take root within him. The days following the climactic battle in Buenos Aires were marked by a slow return to normality, though the city remained shadowed by the recent horrors. The festival, once vibrant and joyous, now carried a somber tone, as whispers of the gruesome events spread throughout the populace. The streets were no longer filled with the carefree revelry of the faithful, but with a muted sense of relief, an unspoken understanding that something terrible had passed, leaving scars that would take time to heal. Father Thomas de Luca, barely able to stand after his confrontation with Michael, was taken in by the local clergy, who remained unaware of the true nature of his mission. They treated his wounds and offered prayers of gratitude for his service. But Thomas's mind was elsewhere, consumed by the memories of the battle and the terrible choices he was forced to make. Each wound he bore was a reminder of the darkness he faced and of the friend he could not save. As he recovered, Thomas moved through the city in a daze, observing the people of Buenos Aires as they attempted to move on with their lives. The city might have been saved, but it felt different now, like a place touched by something otherworldly, where the ordinary and the supernatural briefly intersected. The streets, once so teeming with life, now seemed quieter, as if the city itself was mourning the losses it endured. When Thomas finally returned to the Vatican, he was met with a hero's welcome. The Pope and the surviving members of the Order of Sanctus Sanguis greeted him with solemn respect, acknowledging the sacrifice he'd made to protect the Church and the world from the darkness. They praised him for his courage, for standing where others might have faltered, and for fulfilling the legacy of Father Gabriel Valente. The sacred relic Gabriel once wielded was returned to its place of honor, now a symbol of Thomas's victory. Thomas couldn't shake the hollow feeling that gnawed at his soul. The accolades, the praise, the recognition, it all felt empty. As he walked through the hallowed halls of the Vatican, where Gabriel's presence still lingered like a ghost, Thomas was haunted by the knowledge that his battle was far from over. He knew that Lucius's spirit, though weakened, had not been destroyed, that the ancient evil could return at any moment. That victory, hard won as it was, seemed fragile, as though the darkness was merely lying in wait, biding its time until it could strike again. In the quiet moments between his duties, Thomas reflected on the toll the battle had taken on him. His faith, once unwavering, now felt strained, tested by the horrors he'd witnessed and the choices he'd made. The weight of his role as the new sentinel pressed down on him, heavier with each passing day. Gabriel's shadow loomed large, and Thomas couldn't escape the fear that he would never be able to live up to the legacy of his mentor. He spent long hours in the Vatican's vast library, poring over ancient texts and records, searching for any clue that might have helped him understand the darknesses he now faced. But the more he learned, the more he realized how little he truly knew. The battle with Michael, the loss of his friend, the near destruction of Buenos Aires, these events had shaken him to his core, leaving him questioning whether he had the strength to continue in his role. Late at night, when the Vatican was quiet and the shadows stretched long across the floor, Thomas knelt in the chapel, alone with his thoughts. He prayed for guidance, for strength, for the wisdom to know how to proceed. But his prayers were met with silence, and in that silence Thomas felt the weight of his burden more acutely than ever. He wondered if he had what it takes to be the Church's protector, to stand against the darkness that still lingered in the world. As the days passed, Thomas slowly began to recover from his physical wounds, but the emotional and spiritual scars remained. He knew that the battle was far from over, and that the true test of his faith and resolve was yet to come. Vatican may see him as a hero, but Thomas knew the truth. The darkness was still out there, waiting, and the fight against it would require more than just strength and courage. It would need a sacrifice of the soul, one that Thomas was not sure he was ready to make. The skies of Washington, D.C. were darkening, and the city's bustling streets were lit by the low glow of neon signs and the steady stream of headlights. The nation's capital, a symbol of power and influence, was now unwittingly playing host to a new, insidious presence. In the shadows of the city, a figure emerged. A man, seemingly ordinary, yet moving with an eerie purpose. Michael, his wounds miraculously healed, his step steady and confident. The haunting pallor of his skin and the unsettling gleam in his eyes were the only signs of the darkness that resided within him. Lucius's spirit, far from being vanquished, had intertwined itself fully with Michael's essence, making him more dangerous than ever before. Michael blended effortlessly into the city's crowd, his face a mask of calm as he surveyed his new hunting grounds. The bustling energy of Washington, D.C. masked the ominous undercurrent that followed him, an ancient evil reborn and ready to unleash its full potential. As he disappeared into the throngs of people, the city's skyline darkened, a stark reminder that the cycle of darkness had not yet been broken, but merely relocated, preparing for its next phase. Meanwhile, back at the Vatican, Father Thomas de Luca was finally beginning to find some semblance of peace after the harrowing events in Buenos Aires. Exhausted, he retired to his quarters, hoping for a brief respite. However, a terrible sense of unease pulled him from his rest. He felt compelled to check on Gabriel's journal, the very tome that had both guided and haunted him during his mission. To his horror, Thomas discovered that the journal was missing. The dusty old shelf where it was carefully placed now held only an empty space, devoid of the book that contained the secrets of Lucius's past and the terrible warnings of what was to come. Panic seized him as he searched frantically, but it was as if the journal had simply vanished into thin air. Realization dawned. Someone within the Vatican, perhaps someone close, had taken the journal, and the implications were terrifying. Could it be that the darkness had not only survived, but had found a way to infiltrate the very heart of the church once more? The thought was almost too much to bear, but the missing journal was undeniable proof that Lucius's influence lingered, perhaps even within the order of Sanctus Sanguis itself. As Thomas stood in the dim light of his quarters, the weight of this discovery was too much to bear. The victory in Buenos Aires was not the end, but rather the beginning of a new and more dangerous chapter in this story. The enemy was closer than he'd ever imagined, hiding in plain sight, and the true battle was only just beginning. Thomas looked out over the Vatican, the sense of foreboding deepening as he realized that his fight was far from over. The darkness that had plagued the world for centuries was not easily defeated, and as long as Lucius's spirit endured, so too did the threat to the very soul of the church. So I don't normally do a story on Tuesday night, but this went down so well yesterday, and I'm going to be very, very busy tomorrow, so I thought, why not? And the author, Brandreth McClure, was so pleased with the reception for the first part that he sent me the second, and there you go, 2 nights in a row. But we might be waiting a little bit of time until the next one comes out, because he hasn't written it yet. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one. Again, as always, thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video. I'll do my best to join in the conversation. Go on, check out my t-shirt store. The Halloween special is on 10% discount right up from now until, well, Halloween, of course. So, my dear friends, till the next time, probably Thursday, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.